All right, still cruising through here, chapter 12 in kinesiology 230. This is presentation number 4, focusing a little bit more on static and dynamic stretching. So with static stretching, it's what you often see done in a gym. And what people will normally do, they'll come in, they'll sit down, they'll stretch themselves out for a little bit, and then they'll go off and work out. But it's stretching has its place, and as long as it's not in the athletic domain where we're trying to increase sport performance, it's okay to do some stretching beforehand. Some people actually prefer it. Quite okay to go ahead and take a yoga class and do some stretching, which is all stretching with some strength in there. But what I want to point out is when you look at static stretching, it's a slower and more constant speed. It's a stretch that's held for 30 seconds minimum, could be more, and it doesn't activate the stretch reflex. And also, when you look at this, it's something that you can have a little bit of discomfort and a little bit of feeling like you're stretching a little bit too far. But again, as I mentioned, you have this stretch reflex that actually you have this tremoring, and then your body kind of just lets go, and it's a matter of almost like winning over the muscle. And what should happen is when you have that kind of winning over the muscle, that overstretch sensation should diminish. And if it doesn't, then you know you probably have gone just a little bit too far with your stretch. Okay, PNF, proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. It's a partner-assisted protocol. I did a cut and paste here so you guys can take a moment to read this at your leisure if you want to pause me. But it's a matter of stretching, so you have a passive, and then the person contracts to push, stretch, contract, and push. And it's very common to see kind of like that contract, relax, contract, relax, contract, relax, or see relax, push isometric, push concentrically, then relax yet again. So you'll see different variations of this, but the most common is just that, the hold and relax method. And the book does a pretty good job of outlining this in terms of how to go through the process. And it's the same thing, you know, you're trying to win over the proprioceptive side, and you're trying to quiet down the muscle spindle side so they get out of protection mode and they allow the stretch to happen. And the isometric side of it stimulates the GTO. And when you have that contraction, you have that, remember we were talking before where you have the muscle spindle lays in line with the muscle fibers, and when you stretch it too fast, too far, it causes a reactive response that contracts the muscle being stretched. When you go through the isometric side of it, the GTO comes into play where it helps actually take muscle tension out of the equation. So, you know, it's a wonderfully effective tool for stretching, but it's a matter of you got to have a partner to do it. All right, so let's jump into the next one. With dynamic stretching, it's a faster movement. What you'll see is it very much mimics many times what we're trying to do in athletic movement patterns. And, you know, the exercise itself could be part of a more dynamic actual activity that we're just taking it and blowing it apart into a whole part, whole format to actually focus on some dynamic components and dynamic flexibility within those little subcomponents of the movement. But what happens here is, you know, provides the opportunity to combine different movement patterns for greater time management, which is great. I mean, every client wants that. And a great example is this or are the ABC drills. And I talked a little bit about those before in the other presentation where you had the three of them. We're talking about high knee walk, light skip, power skip. You know, that's a progression on a continuum towards sprinting. And those drills incorporate low-level plyometrics, which is great. You get a nice priming effect for the central nervous system, but you also have a high degree of dynamic flexibility. Now, I will say this, dynamic stretching is different than ballistic because we're not trying to bounce at full length. You're not going to full length, holding that position and bounce, bounce, bounce. It's actually a full cyclical range of motion that you do within a movement pattern. So if we look at something like this, and we work on just standing in place, dynamic hamstring flexibility. In this, we're in contact patch as ball of the foot, which is proper for sprint technique. We are nice straight leg, chest high, back flat, and we're using the bar here to help for support. But you can take like your ABC drills for running technique and sprint technique and replicate them in a standing environment here while addressing the bar. But the other side of this is just a sidebar. You can also do these drills in the swimming pool and use the viscosity of the water, which is thicker than the resistance offered by the air, to be able to have a resisted type of movement pattern. So if we look at this and what happens here, we're working on dynamic hamstring flexibility as we go from a ball of foot position to reinforce the contact patch for running technique, and the hamstrings come into play here. Let's get this split. And as you're watching this, notice we have that ball of the foot position on the floor, but also the foot strike for the left foot that's coming down. You're trying to reinforce where that foot strikes next to the right, and then the right next to the left. That foot strike should be by the arch. Right about the, and we switch. The foot strike comes down right by the arch. And so, you use something like that to be able to take a very dynamic thing like sprinting, break it up into subcomponents like an ABC drill, a series of ABC drills, and then you even use one of the ABC drills to work on dynamic flexibility and reinforcing the proper contact patch of ball of foot on the ground and also the foot strike position of the other foot coming down over and over and over again. So there's several benefits to this, and if you use dynamic stretching right, especially in the athletic environment, you're really able to translate some skills from a very dynamic environment that could be like a practice environment to a one-on-one coached environment to really work on refining some movement patterns. So with that, guys, I'm going to jump out of this and go to the next one. Hold on.